Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story this hour. Tens of thousands of Israelis poured into the streets of cities across the country on Sunday night after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu abruptly fired his defense minister. This for challenging the Israeli leader's judicial overhaul plan. Scores of demonstrators in Tel Aviv blocked a main highway and lit bonfires. Drone footage also showed protesters waving blue and white Israeli flags and raising slogans against the judicial overhaul bill. Police fired water cannons to forcefully remove the protesters who refused to leave the main highway.
We served 4 years in the army, 3 years. Everyone here served in the army, and they are serving too. And we are going to protect the democracy. We are here for the democracy. Bibi is not here for the democracy. Thank you very much.
We're here to protest. We feel that we have no other way. We have to speak. We have to show ourselves and say, this is it. Up here. This has to be stopped. This Prime Minister is not qualified anymore.
Now, similar scenes were witnessed outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem, where the police officials used water cannons to disperse the demonstrators. The government's plan to increase its control over the judiciary has triggered a national crisis and sparked the largest protest movement in Israeli history. Netanyahu's government is pushing ahead for a parliamentary vote this week on a centerpiece of the overhaul, a law that would give the governing coalition the final say over all judicial appointments. However, Israel's former defense minister on Saturday called for an immediate halt to the far-right government's contentious plan to overhaul the country's judiciary. The now sacked minister said that the plan has stirred turmoil within Israel's military and posed a threat to the country's security.
למען ביטחון ישראל, למען בנותינו ובנינו. צריך לעצור בעת הזו את תהליך החקיקה, לאפשר לעם ישראל לחגוג יחד את חג הפסח ואת יום העצמאות, ולהתאבל יחד ביום הזיכרון וביום השואה. אלו ימים קדושים עבורנו.
Israel's Consul General in New York, Asaf Zamir, also announced his resignation on Sunday in protest over Netanyahu's firing of the defense minister. Taking to Twitter, Zamir wrote, and I am quoting here, "Today's dangerous decision to fire the Minister of Defense convinced me that I can no longer continue representing this government. I believe it is my duty to ensure that Israel remains a beacon of democracy and freedom in the world." Meanwhile, amid the unprecedented demonstrations in the country that erupted hours after the defense minister's sacking, several Likud lawmakers and ministers also joined the call to stop the legislative process of Netanyahu's judicial overhaul. According to reports, Netanyahu's top minister and ally, Ari Deri, expressed support for halting the process. Meanwhile, the country's economy minister also issued a statement which appears to assume that Netanyahu will halt the judicial overhaul legislation. The economy minister further said that if this happens, then he will support Netanyahu in doing so. According to reports, Netanyahu could be considering halting the judicial overhaul reform. The coalition party leaders are scheduled to meet in the morning. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's lawyer has reportedly threatened not to represent him in his trial if the judicial reform is passed. After large-scale demonstrations, Israeli President Isaac Herzog has once again called for an immediate halt to the judicial reforms. In a direct message to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government, the president said, and I will quote, "For the sake of the unity of the people of Israel, For the sake of the necessary responsibility, I call on you to halt the legislative process immediately, unquote. Israel's ally, the United States, has expressed deep concern over the events taking place in Israel, further underscoring the urgent need for a compromise.
Contains that we're on track to cut.
Now, for more on this, we are being joined by our correspondent Jody Cohen, live from Ra'anana. Hello to you, Jody. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu abruptly firing his defense minister. The ripple effects being felt already. Is this a clear sign of cracks starting to show in the coalition?
Hi, Alison. Yes, so Netanyahu dismissed Defense Minister Gallant because he said that he believes there should be a pause in these judicial reforms. Netanyahu reportedly believes that Gallant's response to the reservists' refusal to serve was weak, although Gallant hasn't yet received a formal dismissal letter. Now, that led to spontaneous protests throughout the night. These were not planned in advance, and they differ from the protests we've seen over the past 12 weeks in that respect. Now, that's because a lot of people believe, they agree with the call to pause these reforms, and also because Netanyahu dismissed the defense minister at a time when security is on high alert. We've got Ramadan going on now, which is a sensitive time. We've seen riots over the past few years during Ramadan. Terror threats are at a high. Hezbollah recently reportedly exploded a bomb over the border in northern Israel. And Iran is closer to nuclear weapons if they choose to break out. So people took to the streets across the country, from Eilat down in the south to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and Ra'anana here in the center, to Kiryat Shmona in the north until 3 a.m. this morning. And actually the Ayalon highway, the major highway in the center of Israel, only reopened 1 hour ago. Protests are set to continue on Monday. The Histadrut, the largest labor union, is likely to call a general strike. And we're just hearing that the Sheba Medical Center, one of the largest hospitals here, are planning to join that strike. There are hunger strikers outside Netanyahu's house. And I've been speaking to the protesters here who say that they will be here every day.
Right, Jody, the president, ministers, as well as the protesters calling for a halt to these judicial reforms. Is there any hint that Benjamin Netanyahu will put a halt to these reforms?
The feeling is that Prime Minister Netanyahu probably thought that Gallant's dismissal would deter further rebels, particularly in the Likud party, his own party. Now, remember, the coalition paused all of the judicial reform bills in the original package, except one, which is the judicial selection bill, and that is being debated right now. It's thought that there is unease within Likud, with some people calling for a pause to happen. There are protests taking place outside Likud ministers' houses and also outside the homes of prominent Likud MPs, including where I am now, which is in the street where Danny Danon lives. Now, there's pressure to vote specifically on these MPs who have felt that they might be more in favor of calling for a pause to the legislation. And the hope is that then from the protesters, the hope is that they will then be able to defeat them in Parliament. Remember, the coalition won 64 seats in the most recent election, so they would need 61 votes to pass the legislation. So swinging a few could mean the difference between passing or stopping the legislation. President Herzog has called for the legislation to be stopped. Prime Minister Netanyahu is now believed to be in favor of freezing the legislation, and the ultra-Orthodox parties are said to support him for the sake of unity. But National Security Minister Ben-Gvir reportedly wants this to continue. Netanyahu has been in meetings throughout the night. The coalition heads are meeting right now as we speak. And Netanyahu is also thought to be expected to make a statement today, although that hasn't yet been confirmed.
Right. Jody, thank you very much for bringing us all the latest, and you will, of course, be keeping us up to date as events unfold there.
Thank you.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.